Emma Wilson's lungs burned as she sprinted down the dusty path, her blonde ponytail whipping wildly behind her. The thundering of heavy paws grew closer. She dared not look back. "Please, God," she prayed between desperate gasps for air. "Don't let it get me." The massive dog was gaining. She could hear its ragged breathing, feel the vibration of its powerful stride through the ground. A guttural growl sent ice through her veins. Emma stumbled on a rock, nearly falling. In that terrifying moment, she glanced back and caught sight of the beast, 100 pounds of muscle with a scarred face, teeth bared, eyes locked on her. The German Shepherd mix looked like something from a nightmare. She screamed, her voice echoing across Pinewood Creek's valley, but there was no one to hear. Just the relentless pursuit of what Emma was certain would be her death. What she couldn't possibly know was why the dog was chasing her. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Pinewood Creek. Arizona sat like a forgotten postcard at the edge of civilization, a scatter of weathered buildings, stubborn desert flora, and people who valued space over amenities. Summer had descended with its familiar brutality, the June heat turning the air into a shimmering curtain above the cracked asphalt roads that connected the modest homes. The Wilsons were still considered newcomers, having moved to their little ranch house at the eastern edge of town just 6 months ago. They'd come seeking refuge after Tom Wilson's investment firm in Phoenix collapsed, taking their savings and his pride along with it. Their new home, with its peeling paint and creaking porch, sat at the intersection between town and wilderness, the last stop before miles of scrubland and forgotten trails. Emma Wilson had taken the move harder than her parents anticipated. At 12 years old, she'd been uprooted from friends, her advanced art program, and everything familiar. And the transition from private school to Pinewood Creek's combined middle-high school had been jarring. She'd grown quiet, retreating into her sketchbooks, where she created detailed landscapes that always seemed to feature distant horizons. What her parents didn't fully appreciate was how the move had reawakened Emma's deepest fear. 4 years earlier, a neighbor's German Shepherd had bitten her arm when she accidentally stepped on its tail. The physical scars had faded to thin white lines, but the psychological wound remained raw, especially here where it seemed every other household kept dogs for protection or hunting. Across town lived Martha Jenkins, an 80-year-old widow whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime of hard work. Few in town knew of her past as one of the military's first female K-9 trainers. Her small house at the edge of Miller's Creek had become a silent sanctuary for strays, though she kept this charity mostly to herself in a town divided on the wild dog problem. Among those strays was Ranger, a magnificent German Shepherd Husky mix whose intelligence shone through eyes that seemed to evaluate everything with uncanny perception. The prominent scar that ran from his right eye to his jaw gave him a fearsome appearance that belied his gentle nature. For 3 years since old man Franklin's passing, Ranger had survived on his own, avoiding the dog catchers and developing a complex understanding of human behavior that kept him alive when many other strays disappeared. Sheriff Mike Callahan had noticed the big dog occasionally, but had more pressing concerns than a stray that caused no trouble, unlike the Conway brothers, whose petty crimes and animal cruelty had become a growing problem since their father abandoned them last year. None of them could have predicted how their lives would intersect on this scorching Tuesday in June. "We can't keep living like this. Tom," Diane Wilson's voice carried through the thin walls of their ranch house, reaching Emma's bedroom where she sat cross-legged on her bed, colored pencils scattered across her sketchbook. "Lower your voice," Tom responded, his tone weary rather than angry. "I've got 2 promising leads at the construction site, and Mr. Garvey mentioned possible office work at the lumber yard." Emma had heard variations of this conversation too many times since moving to Pinewood Creek. The arguing would continue, followed by strained silence, then awkward attempts at normalcy that fooled no one. She closed her sketchbook quietly, slipped on her worn sneakers, and moved toward her window. The afternoon stretched before her, golden and empty. Her parents, lost in their financial worries, wouldn't notice her absence for hours. The drop from her window to the scrubby yard below was one she'd made many times. Emma landed with practiced ease and headed toward the trail that skirted the eastern edge of town. She knew she wasn't supposed to take old Miller's trail alone. Her father had been explicit about that, but it cut 20 minutes off the walk to Crystal Creek, where she'd found a small, private spot perfect for drawing. The trail wound through patches of mesquite and creosote bush, the scent of warm dust rising with each step. Emma pulled her water bottle from her backpack and took a careful sip, remembering Martha Jenkins' warning about conserving water in the desert. The old woman was one of the few people in town who treated Emma like a person rather than that poor Wilson girl whose daddy lost everything. 3/4 of a mile down the trail, Emma heard voices, young male voices, punctuated by laughter that made the hair on her neck stand up. She slowed, considering turning back, when she recognized the Conway brothers' distinctive drawls. 50 points if you hit it in the eye. Meh. That was the youngest, Levi, his voice cracking with adolescent enthusiasm. "Shut up and watch how it's done," replied Tyler, the 17-year-old who seemed to find joy only in cruelty. Emma ducked behind a large creosote bush, peering through the branches. About 30 yards ahead, the 3 brothers were gathered in a small clearing, taking turns throwing rocks at something she couldn't see. Their truck was parked haphazardly nearby, country music blaring from its open doors. She was about to backtrack when she heard a yelp of pain that wasn't human. Her stomach clenched. They were hurting an animal, half a mile away, near the abandoned Martinez property that had become an unofficial dumping ground. Ranger lifted his head from the small puddle of brackish water where he'd been drinking. His ears swiveled forward, catching the sound of the Conway brothers' truck before any human could have detected it. He'd had run-ins with them before the middle one had the knife that had given him the scar across his face last winter. Ranger moved with the silent efficiency of a creature whose survival depended on not being noticed. He circled downwind, nose testing the air as he approached. There were other scents beyond the familiar stench of beer and cigarettes that clung to the Conway boys, the medicinal chemical smell of the substances they sometimes cooked in the abandoned barn on their property. And something else that made his hackles rise other dogs. These weren't the usual strays he encountered in his territory. These carried the aggressive pheromones of fighting dogs, pit bulls, 3 of them, chained in the bed of the truck but straining against their restraints as they caught his scent on the breeze. A new sound reached him, a lighter footfall approaching from the direction of town. Human, small, female. The scent signature registered in his memory, the girl from the blue house at the edge of his territory. The one who sometimes sat by the creek with colored sticks, making marks on paper. Ranger calculated distances and threats, with an instinct honed by years of survival. The girl was walking into danger, she couldn't possibly perceive. Emma froze as she heard truck doors slam and engines start. The Conway brothers were leaving, their laughter fading as they pulled away. She waited several minutes to ensure they were gone before continuing down the path, now moving faster to make up for lost time. As she rounded a bend in the trail, a sudden commotion from the direction the truck had gone made her jump. Angry shouts, and the unmistakable sound of dogs barking, not the friendly neighborhood barking she sometimes heard in town, but something primal and threatening. "Get 'em back in the truck," Tyler Conway's voice carried on the still air. "I can't, the chain broke!" Emma's blood turned cold as she realized what was happening. The Conway brothers had lost control of whatever dogs they had with them. She stood paralyzed, unsure which direction meant safety. The decision was made for her when 3 muscular pit bulls appeared on the trail ahead, dust rising from their paws as they skidded to a stop upon seeing her. Their chain leashes dragged behind them, eyes locked on the small human who stood frozen before them. The lead dog, white with brown patches and a chest like a barrel, lowered its head and growled, a sound that bypassed all rational thought and struck directly at the primitive part of Emma's brain that recognized death when it saw it. Run! Her body obeyed before her mind fully processed the command. Emma turned and sprinted back the way she'd come, her backpack bouncing against her spine. Behind her, the snarling grew louder as the dogs gave chase. From his position in the shadows of a large mesquite, Ranger watched the scene unfold with focused intensity. The fighting dogs were pursuing the same girl who left food scraps at the edge of her yard sometimes, perhaps not even realizing she was doing it. The same girl whose scent carried no malice. Without hesitation, Ranger exploded from his hiding place, powerful legs eating up the distance between himself and the pursuing pack. He intercepted the trailing dog first, teeth finding purchase on its scruff as he used his momentum to throw the smaller animal off the path before it could recover. He was already engaging the second, his snarl deeper and more commanding than theirs. Emma heard the sounds of dogfighting behind her and pushed herself to run faster, convinced the animals were tearing each other apart in their eagerness to reach her. Memories of the German shepherd's teeth sinking into her arm 4 years ago flashed through her mind, the pain as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. When she risked a glance back, her terror doubled. The largest dog she'd ever seen, a monster with a scarred face, was gaining on her, having broken away from the fight. Its massive paws thundered against the dirt path, sending small clouds of dust with each impact. The dog's mouth was open, teeth gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Help!" Emma screamed, though she knew no one was close enough to hear. "Somebody help me!" She veered off the trail, hoping to lose the animal in the denser brush, but the massive dog adjusted course effortlessly, staying right behind her. Emma's lungs burned, her legs growing heavier with each stride, but fear pushed her forward. What she couldn't see was that Ranger wasn't focused on her at all. His attention was fixed on the largest of the pit bulls, which had broken past him and was now closing the distance to Emma from her left flank. Ranger's strategic mind, a combination of his training under Old Man Franklin and years of survival, recognized that the girl was inadvertently running toward rather than away from danger. The Conway property, with more fighting dogs, lay in the direction she was headed. As Emma burst through a stand of scrub oak, she found herself in a small clearing and froze in horror. The Conway brothers stood by their truck 20 yards away, Tyler holding another snarling pit bull by its chain. "Look what we got here," Tyler called, his face breaking into a cruel smile. "Little Miss Wilson out for a stroll where she don't belong." Emma turned to retreat but saw the massive scarred dog blocking her path back to the trail, its chest heaving, eyes fixed on her. She was trapped. Time seemed to crystallize as Emma stood frozen between the Conway brothers ahead and the massive scarred dog behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs so violently she was certain it would burst. The scarred dog took another step toward her, its amber eyes never leaving her face. "Please," she whispered, though whether to the dog or to God, she wasn't sure. What happened next occurred so quickly Emma's mind struggled to process it. The scarred dog lunged not at her, but past her, colliding with brutal force into the pit bull that Tyler Conway had been restraining. The two animals became a whirlwind of teeth and claws, dust rising around them as they fought. "What the—" Tyler stumbled backward, dropping the chain in surprise. "That's the ghost dog from Miller's Creek." Emma didn't wait to understand. Instinct took over and she ran, veering away from the fighting dogs and the Conway brothers, back toward the main trail. Behind her, she heard Tyler shouting obscenities, the snarls of fighting dogs, and then, most terrifying of all, the sound of heavy paws pursuing her once again. A memory flashed through Emma's mind, so vivid she could almost feel the summer heat of that day 4 years ago. She'd been playing in the sprinkler in their Phoenix backyard when she accidentally stepped on the neighbor's German shepherd's tail. The dog had whipped around, teeth finding her forearm before anyone could react. She remembered the crushing pressure, the hot breath, her own screams that seemed to come from somewhere outside herself. "I don't want to die," Emma gasped as she ran, tears streaming down her face. The main trail appeared ahead if she could just reach it. Maybe someone would be there. Maybe she could find help. The thundering paws behind her grew louder. The monster dog was gaining. From his vantage point on her weather-beaten porch, Martha Jenkins lowered her binoculars with a frown. She'd been watching a family of quail when movement on Old Miller's trail caught her attention, a flash of blonde hair, a running child, and behind her, the unmistakable form of Ranger in full pursuit. "Lord, have mercy," Martha murmured. Recognizing Emma Wilson, she reached for her walking stick and cell phone. Whatever was happening couldn't be good. Despite her 80 years and arthritic knees, Martha moved with surprising speed down her porch steps. Ranger's mind worked with the precision his original training had instilled in him. The girl was running in blind panic, heading down the main trail that would eventually lead back to town, but not before passing through territory where 2 more of the fighting dogs had run after escaping the Conway truck. He needed to redirect her, to guide her toward safety. But her fear was making his job impossible. He kept pace behind her, occasionally darting to her left or right to herd her in safer directions, using techniques Franklin had taught him for guiding lost hikers. But unlike the grateful hikers of his past life, this girl saw only a threat in his size and scarred face. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself beyond exhaustion. The massive dog was playing with her. She was certain, sometimes falling back, then surging forward, cutting off escape routes, herding her like prey. When she tried to veer toward a side path that might lead to houses, the dog blocked her way with a threatening growl, forcing her back to the main trail. "Go away," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Leave me alone." Her foot caught on an exposed root, and Emma went down hard, skinning her palms and knees on the rough trail. "This is it," she thought, squeezing her eyes shut as she heard the dog approach. She curled into a protective ball, waiting for the tearing of teeth into flesh. Instead, she felt hot breath against her neck and a low whine. When no attack came, Emma cracked one eye open to find the scarred dog standing over her, ears alert, attention focused on something ahead on the trail. Before she could process this development, the dog's demeanor changed dramatically. Hackles raised, teeth bared in a snarl that made her blood run cold. Emma slowly turned her head to see what had provoked this reaction. 30 yards ahead, 2 of the pit bulls from earlier had emerged onto the trail, their aggressive posture making their intentions clear. To her astonishment, the scarred dog positioned itself between her and the approaching threat, its massive body forming a living barrier. The deep growl that emanated from its chest wasn't directed at her, but at the other dogs. Could it be protecting her? The thought seemed absurd, yet the evidence was right before her eyes. Emma scrambled to her feet, wincing at the pain in her scraped knees. The moment she was upright, the scarred dog glanced back at her, then jerked its head toward a narrow deer path leading away from the confrontation. "You want me to run that way?" Emma whispered, scarcely believing she was trying to communicate with the animal she'd been fleeing from. The dog repeated the head gesture more emphatically, then turned back to face the approaching pit bulls. Emma hesitated only a moment before sprinting down the indicated path. Behind her, she heard the unmistakable sounds of dogs fighting vicious snarls, the impact of bodies, yelps of pain. She wanted to look back but forced herself to keep running. The path wound through thicker vegetation before emerging onto Cottonwood Road, which would lead directly back to town. Her momentary relief evaporated when she heard paws thundering behind her again. The scarred dog had dispatched the other animals and resumed its pursuit. Whatever momentary doubt she'd had about its intentions vanished in a fresh wave of terror. Emma pushed her burning legs harder. Cottonwood Road stretching endlessly before her, back at the Wilson house. The phone rang shrilly, cutting through Tom and Diane's tense silence. "Hello," Diane answered, irritation still coloring her voice from the earlier argument. The garbled, panicked voice of her daughter burst through the speaker. "Mom, help big dog chasing me Cottonwood Road." The call cut off abruptly. Tom was already grabbing his rifle from the gun cabinet before Diane had time to lower the phone. "Emma's in trouble," she said unnecessarily, her face drained of color. "Something about a dog on Cottonwood Road." "Call 911, Tom ordered, checking the rifle with practiced movements. "Then call Mike Pedersen and Jim Colton, tell them to meet me there with whatever weapons they've got." Across town, Martha Jenkins had managed to flag down Sheriff Callahan's patrol car. The aging lawman rolled down his window, tipping his hat respectfully. "Afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins. What can I do for you?" "Mike, there's trouble brewing on Old Miller's Trail," Martha said without preamble. "The Wilson girl is being chased by a dog." Sheriff Callahan's expression darkened. "What kind of dog? One of those pit bulls the Conway boys have been fighting?" Martha hesitated. "No, it's Franklin's old dog, Ranger. The big German Shepherd mix, I thought he was just a ghost story the kids made up." Sheriff Callahan reached for his radio. "You sure about this?" "Martha, as sure as I'm standing here. But Mike—" Martha placed a weathered hand on the car door. "Ranger wasn't trained to attack. He was a search and rescue dog. Best in the state before Franklin passed." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. Search and rescue. You mean to tell me that scarred beast that's been haunting the outskirts for 3 years is a trained rescue dog? Martha nodded firmly. I helped Franklin train him myself. That dog wouldn't harm a child unless she was threatening someone else's life. Sheriff Callahan looked skeptical but nodded. I'll keep that in mind, but right now, I've got reports of loose fighting dogs from the Conway property and a terrified girl on the run. You'd better get home, Mrs. Jenkins. This could get ugly. As his patrol car pulled away, Martha's eyes narrowed with determination. She turned and began walking as quickly as her old legs would carry her toward her small garage. If Mike Callahan wouldn't listen, she needed evidence. And she knew exactly where Franklin had kept Ranger service records and training certificates. Meanwhile, Emma had reached the halfway point of Cottonwood Road, her legs threatening to buckle with each step. The massive dog remained behind her, sometimes closing the distance, sometimes falling back, but never giving up the chase. Her lungs felt like they were filled with fire instead of air, each breath more painful than the last. When she heard a vehicle approaching from behind, hope surged through her exhausted body. She turned, waving her arms frantically, only to feel that hope collapse as she recognized the battered Conway truck. Tyler Conway leaned out the passenger window, his face twisted in anger. "That mutt killed my best fighting dog," he shouted, "and you're trespassing on private property." The truck accelerated toward her, and Emma threw herself off the road into the drainage ditch just in time. As the vehicle roared past, something sailed through the air, a rock the size of a baseball that struck the ground inches from her head. "Next one won't miss," Levi called as the truck continued down the road. Emma struggled to her feet, sobbing now from fear and exhaustion. The town was still at least 2 miles away. She wouldn't make it, not with the dog still pursuing her, not with the Conway brothers circling back. Then she heard something that made her heart soar, sirens in the distance, growing louder. Help was coming. If she could just hold on a little longer. The sun beat down mercilessly as Emma stumbled forward, each step a negotiation with her exhausted body. The sirens that had momentarily raised her hopes faded in a different direction. The sheriff wasn't coming her way after all. Behind her, the massive dog maintained its pursuit, sometimes disappearing into the brush only to reappear moments later, herding her along Cottonwood Road toward town. "Just leave me alone," she sobbed, her voice barely audible between gasping breaths. Her throat felt like sandpaper, her water bottle lost somewhere during the initial flight. The Conway brothers' truck had disappeared around a bend, but Emma held no illusions they were gone for good. Tyler Conway wasn't known for letting grudges go, and she'd witnessed their illegal dogfighting operation. The realization that she was caught between human and canine threats sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through her depleted system. Half a mile ahead, where Cottonwood Road intersected with Juniper Lane, Bill Hawkins was watering the parched rose bushes his late wife had planted 30 years earlier. The 72-year-old retired postal worker straightened his aching back at the sound of approaching footfalls too light and rapid for an adult, too desperate for a casual jogger. When Emma appeared, her blonde hair wild around her dust-streaked face, Hawkins dropped the garden hose in alarm. "Help!" Emma managed to croak, staggering toward the old man's yard. "Dog chasing me." Before Hawkins could respond, the massive German Shepherd mix emerged from the brush, trotting purposefully toward them. The old man stepped in front of Emma protectively, brandishing the garden hose like a weapon. "Get on out of here," you mangy beast," he shouted. "Spraying water in Ranger's direction?" Ranger stopped, assessing the situation with intelligent eyes. He made no aggressive move toward the pair, but circled to maintain visual contact with Emma. When the Conway truck reappeared in the distance, Ranger's demeanor changed instantly, ears flattening, teeth baring in a silent snarl. "Mr. Hawkins, please." Emma tugged at the old man's sleeve. "Those guys in the truck, they're after me too. They have fighting dogs." Hawkins squinted down the road at the approaching vehicle, recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Conway trash," he muttered. "Inside, quick." He ushered Emma toward his house, keeping the hose trained on Ranger, who made no attempt to follow them onto the property. From the safety of Hawkins' screened porch, Emma watched in bewilderment as Ranger positioned himself at the edge of the property, facing the oncoming truck. The dog's posture was unmistakably defensive, muscles tensed beneath his dusty coat. "That dog ain't chasing you," Hawkins said slowly, peering through thick glasses. "Leastways, not the way you think. He's standing guard." "But he's been after me for miles," Emma protested weakly, accepting the glass of water Hawkins offered with shaking hands. The old man's response was non-committal as he reached for his ancient rotary phone. "Your daddy's Tom Wilson, ain't it? Let's get him over here before those Conway boys decide to make more trouble." Across town, the situation was rapidly evolving into a confused mess of conflicting reports. Sheriff Callahan had intercepted the Conway brothers on Highway 16, finding 2 injured pit bulls in the truck bed, along with suspicious equipment that warranted a thorough search. Tyler Conway was loudly proclaiming that a wild beast from hell had attacked his perfectly legal pets without provocation, while his younger brothers nodded in rehearsed agreement. "And where exactly did this happen?" Sheriff Callahan asked, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Old Miller's Trail," Tyler answered promptly. "We were just exercising our dogs, minding our own business." "Funny," the sheriff drawled, "because I've got reports of 3 unleashed pit bulls chasing a young girl near that very location. You boys wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The middle brother, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably. But Tyler's gaze remained steady. "Ain't seen no girl. Just that monster dog that's been haunting the creek. Someone ought to put it down before it kills somebody." Meanwhile, Tom Wilson had assembled an impromptu search party of 5 men, all armed with rifles or shotguns. Diane had managed to triangulate Emma's location based on Bill Hawkins' call and was now directing the group toward Juniper Lane in her SUV. The phone pressed to her ear as Hawkins provided updates. "She's safe for now," the old man assured her. "But those Conway boys are circling, and there's a big dog out there that's got her spooked something fierce, though he ain't acting like any mad dog I've ever seen." "What do you mean?" Diane asked, swerving around a corner sharply enough to make Tom grab the dashboard. "Well," Hawkins said slowly, "he's keeping his distance, staying between my place and where those Conway boys are parked down the road, almost like he's standing guard. Strangest thing I ever saw." "Don't let Emma outside," Tom called loudly enough for Hawkins to hear. "We'll be there in 5 minutes. And if that dog makes one threatening move, shoot it." Martha Jenkins had driven her ancient pickup truck to Franklin Miller's abandoned property, ignoring the no trespassing sign she herself had posted after his death. The former K-9 trainer moved with purpose through the dusty rooms of the small cabin where her friend had spent his last years, heading straight for the cedar chest where Franklin had kept his most important papers. The photo album was exactly where she remembered, its leather cover cracked with age. Martha flipped it open, revealing dozens of photographs of a younger, unscarred ranger in various training scenarios extracting practice victims from rubble, tracking through dense forest, performing water rescues. Most importantly, there was the framed certificate naming Ranger as the State Search and Rescue Division's most valuable canine 4 years running. "I knew it," Martha murmured. Gathering the evidence, as she headed back to her truck, she spotted something that made her pause: paw prints in the dust. Fresh ones, leading to and from the cabin's back door. Looking closer, she noticed the faint remains of dog kibble scattered near the porch steps. Ranger had been returning to the only home he'd known, perhaps seeking connection to his past life and the man who had trained him. Martha's heart ached at the thought of the loyal animal, trained to help humans, now viewed as a monster by the very community he'd once served. At the intersection of Cottonwood Road and Juniper Lane, a tense standoff was developing. The Conway brothers had exited their truck and were now loitering at the edge of Hawkins' property, ostensibly checking their vehicle for damage, but clearly waiting for something or someone. Ranger remained at his self-appointed post, hackles raised, eyes never leaving the three young men. When Tyler took a step toward the property line, the dog issued a low, rumbling growl that stopped him in his tracks. "See!" Tyler called to his brothers loudly enough for Emma and Hawkins to hear through the screened porch. "That thing's rabid. Probably gave our dogs rabies, too. We ought to be compensated. The only compensation you boys deserve is a night in my jail for animal fighting." Sheriff Callahan's voice cut through the tension as his patrol car pulled up behind the Conway truck. "Now step away from that property line and keep your hands where I can see them." The standoff might have ended there if Tom Wilson's pickup hadn't chosen that moment to come barreling down Juniper Lane from the opposite direction, Diane's SUV close behind. Tom leapt from the vehicle before it had fully stopped, rifle in hand, eyes wild as he searched for his daughter. "Emma!" he shouted, spotting her on Hawkins' porch. "Daddy!" Emma pushed through the screen door, relief flooding her tear-streaked face. The moment she stepped into the yard, multiple events collided in a chaos of motion and sound. Ranger, seeing Emma exposed, surged forward protectively. Tom, misinterpreting the dog's movement as an attack, raised his rifle. Sheriff Callahan shouted for Tom to hold his fire, and Tyler Conway, seizing the distraction, reached into his truck bed for something metallic that glinted in the afternoon sun. "Gun!" Sheriff Callahan yelled, drawing his service weapon. "Drop it, Conway!" Emma froze in the middle of the yard, suddenly the focal point of a circle of armed men and one massive dog. Ranger reached her first, positioning himself between the girl and the multiple threats, his body tense but making no aggressive move toward her. "Emma, don't move," Tom called, his rifle still trained on Ranger. "I'll shoot if it touches you." "No, Daddy." Emma's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected authority. "He's not trying to hurt me." The certainty in her voice gave Tom pause, his finger easing slightly on the trigger. In that moment of hesitation, Tyler Conway made his move, raising what turned out to be not a gun but a heavy wrench, hurling it with vicious accuracy at Ranger. The tool struck the dog's shoulder with a sickening thud, drawing a yelp of pain but not driving him from his protective stance. Sheriff Callahan had Conway face down on the ground in seconds, handcuffing him while ordering his brothers to keep their hands visible. "Assault with a deadly weapon," he muttered, pressing his knee into Tyler's back. "That's just the start of what I'm charging you with today." The tension broken. Emma found herself standing inches from the dog she'd feared was hunting her, up close. She could see the intelligence in his amber eyes, the deliberate gentleness in his posture despite the pain he must be feeling from the blow. When he turned his scarred face to look at her, there was no aggression, only a watchful assessment, as if checking her for injuries. "Emma, come here." Slowly, her father called, rifle still raised. "Dad, I don't think he wants to hurt me," Emma said, her voice steadier now. I think he was protecting me." Before anyone could respond to this remarkable statement, a battered pickup truck came rumbling down the road, Martha Jenkins at the wheel. The elderly woman parked haphazardly and emerged clutching a photo album and framed certificate. "Don't you dare shoot that dog. Tom Wilson," she called, moving toward them with surprising speed for her age. "That's Ranger, Franklin Miller's search and rescue dog, finest animal in 3 counties before Franklin passed." Sheriff Callahan, having handed Tyler Conway off to a deputy who'd arrived as backup, approached Martha with a skeptical expression. "Mrs. Jenkins, you're saying this is a trained rescue dog, the same one that's been roaming wild for 3 years. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Martha replied firmly, thrusting the photo album toward him. "And he wasn't chasing that girl to hurt her. He was doing what he was trained to do, protecting her from danger." The gathering crowd of neighbors who'd been drawn by the commotion grew silent, all eyes moving between the elderly woman, the massive dog, and the trembling girl who stood between them. Tom lowered his rifle slightly, confusion evident on his face. But Emma said he chased her for miles. She was terrified. "Of course she was," Martha acknowledged, her voice softening. "A big dog with a scarred face running after you would scare anyone. But look at him now. Is that the posture of an animal that wants to attack?" All eyes turned to Ranger, who remained positioned protectively near Emma, his attention divided between the Conway brothers and the gathering crowd. Despite the wrench blow that must have bruised if not broken his shoulder, he showed no signs of aggression, only alert vigilance. "Mrs. Erickson from the general store called me," Sheriff Callahan said slowly. "Said she was driving home when she saw a big dog fighting with 3 pit bulls while a little girl ran away. Said it looked like the big dog was keeping the others from going after the girl. And I saw him stand between Emma and those Conway boys," Bill Hawkins added, having ventured out to join the growing assembly. "Wouldn't let 'em near my property line." Emma, finding courage she didn't know she possessed, took a careful step closer to Ranger. The dog's ears perked forward, but he made no move toward her, allowing her to decide the pace of their interaction. "I think I understand now," she said quietly. "On the trail, when I fell, he stood between me and those other dogs. He wasn't chasing me. He was following me, protecting me." The realization washed over her in a wave of clarity. "And when I tried to run down that side path, he blocked me and growled. I thought he was being mean, but—" She looked toward Sheriff Callahan. "That's where the Conway place is, isn't it? Where they keep their fighting dogs?" The sheriff nodded grimly. "About half a mile down that path. He was keeping me away from more danger," Emma finished, a tear sliding down her dirty cheek. "All this time, I've been running from someone who was trying to save me." The gathering of neighbors murmured among themselves, the story spreading in hushed tones. Diane Wilson had made her way to her daughter's side, one arm wrapped protectively around Emma's shoulders, her other hand extended cautiously toward Ranger, who sniffed it politely before returning to his vigilant posture. "But why would he protect Emma specifically?" Tom asked, finally lowering his rifle completely. "If he's been wild for 3 years, why focus on helping her?" Martha Jenkins smiled, a knowing look in her faded blue eyes. "Franklin always said Ranger had a sixth sense about people who needed protection, and from what I hear, Emma here has been leaving food scraps at the edge of your property." She raised an eyebrow at Emma. "Isn't that right, child?" Emma blushed. Sometimes I put my sandwich crusts and stuff out there for the birds. And once a steak that Dad overcooked really badly." She glanced apologetically at her father. "Sorry." A chuckle rippled through the gathered neighbors, breaking the last of the tension. "Well, kindness gets repaid in kind," Martha said softly, "even if it comes from unexpected quarters." As the excitement began to settle, Ranger finally allowed himself to show signs of injury, favoring his right shoulder where the wrench had struck. A small whimper escaped him as he attempted to shift position. "He's hurt," Emma said with sudden concern. "That wrench hit him really hard." Dr. Melissa Thornton, the town's veterinarian who lived 3 houses down from Hawkins, pushed her way through the crowd. "Let me see him," she said, professional curiosity overcoming any fear of the animal. If he's truly a trained service dog, he should allow examination. To everyone's amazement, when Dr. Thornton knelt beside Ranger and spoke softly to him, the dog remained perfectly still, even as she gently probed his injured shoulder. Only the slight trembling of his body betrayed his pain. "Definitely not rabid," the vet announced after checking his eyes and gums. "Remarkably healthy for a dog that's been living wild. Actually, the shoulder's badly bruised but probably not broken. He could use some proper nutrition and care, though." She looked up at the gathering. "Does anyone know if Franklin Miller had family who might claim him?" Martha shook her head. "Franklin's only family was his sister in Oregon, and she's in a nursing home now. He asked me to look after Ranger if anything happened to him. But—" her voice faltered. "The dog disappeared after the funeral. I looked for months." "He's been living in the Old Creek caves," Sheriff Callahan said. "My deputies have spotted him there occasionally. Folks started calling him the ghost dog because he'd appear and disappear like a shadow." "All this time," Emma whispered, kneeling slowly beside the injured animal. "You've been out there alone, haven't you? But still doing your job, still helping people." When she cautiously extended her hand, Ranger sniffed it carefully, then did something that drew a collective gasp from the onlookers. He lowered his massive head and gently placed his chin on Emma's knee, amber eyes looking up at her with what could only be described as trust. "I think," Martha Jenkins said with a smile, "Ranger may have found himself a new person to look after." The makeshift community gathering in Bill Hawkins' front yard began to disperse as Sheriff Callahan restored order. The Conway brothers were escorted to separate patrol cars, Tyler facing multiple charges related to animal fighting and assault, his younger siblings detained for questioning. Dr. Thornton had fashioned a temporary sling for Ranger's injured shoulder using supplies from her emergency kit, and the dog bore the treatment with stoic dignity that impressed even the most skeptical onlookers. "What happens to him now?" Emma asked, her initial fear completely replaced by concern as she gently stroked Ranger's uninjured side. The massive dog remained beside her, occasionally scanning the surroundings with alert eyes, but otherwise completely focused on the girl he had protected. Martha Jenkins cleared her throat. "Well, technically, I'm his legal owner. Franklin's will left Ranger to me, though I never got the chance to honor that bequest." She knelt slowly, her arthritic knees protesting, and looked directly into Ranger's intelligent eyes. "You've been taking care of yourself all this time, haven't you? Boy, doing your job even without anyone asking." Ranger's tail swept once across the dusty ground, not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement. Tom Wilson stood awkwardly to the side, his rifle now safely stowed in his truck, shame evident in his tense posture. "Mrs. Jenkins, I nearly shot him. If Emma hadn't spoken up when she did." The elderly woman fixed him with a penetrating gaze. "But you didn't shoot, Tom, when it mattered. You listened to your daughter instead of your fear." She nodded approvingly. "That counts for something in my book." Diane Wilson stepped forward, her arm still protectively around Emma's shoulders. "We can't thank you enough for coming forward with the truth about Ranger. Emma could have been—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the possibilities too horrifying to voice. "I've seen those pit bulls the Conway boys keep," Sheriff Callahan added grimly. "Fighting dogs trained to kill. If Ranger hadn't intervened—" He shook his head, adjusting his hat. "Well, let's just say we might be having a very different kind of gathering today." The weight of this reality settled over the group. Emma looked up at Ranger with new understanding, remembering how he had positioned himself between her and the other dogs, how he had blocked her path toward the Conway property. Each action she had misinterpreted as aggression had been, in fact, protection. "Can we take him home?" Emma asked suddenly, looking between her parents and Martha. "Just until his shoulder heals." Diane exchanged a meaningful glance with Tom, whose conflicted expression spoke volumes. He had nearly shot the animal that saved his daughter's life, a guilt that wouldn't soon fade. "That's not a small commitment, Emma," Tom said carefully. "Ranger's a big dog with specialized training. He's been wild for years. And you've been terrified of dogs since—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at her scarred arm. "I know," Emma admitted, surprising everyone with her steady voice. "But he needs help now, and—" She swallowed hard. "Maybe we could help each other." Dr. Thornton stepped into the conversation with professional authority. "Ranger will need proper care for that shoulder-restricted movement, medication, regular checkups. He's also malnourished and likely has parasites from living wild." She looked thoughtfully at the Wilson family. "It would be ideal if he could stay somewhere he could be closely monitored." Martha Jenkins straightened her bent frame as much as her aging spine would allow. "I'd take him myself, but my arthritis has gotten so bad I can barely manage my own property anymore." She fixed Tom with a pointed stare. "But I intend to visit regularly, wherever he ends up. That dog deserves a proper home after what he's done." The message was clear. Martha might be transferring physical custody, but she would be watching to ensure Ranger was treated with the respect he'd earned. Tom ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of surrender. "Let's take this one step at a time. We can bring him home to recover, and then—" He looked at his daughter, whose expression had transformed from terror to determined advocacy in the space of an hour. "Then we'll see." The journey to the Wilson home proved more complicated than anticipated. Ranger, despite his injury and evident trust in Emma, refused to enter Tom's pickup truck. After several gentle attempts, Martha Jenkins chuckled knowingly. Franklin always said Ranger had one quirk from his early training: he won't ride in the bed of a pickup. Something about a bad experience during rescue certification. She smiled at the memory. He needs to ride in the cab, or not at all. This revelation necessitated a reshuffling of vehicles and passengers, eventually. Emma found herself in the back seat of her mother's SUV with Ranger beside her, his massive form taking up most of the available space. The dog sat regally upright despite his injury, amber eyes tracking the familiar landscape as they drove through town toward the Wilson home. Word had spread quickly through Pinewood Creek's efficient, small-town grapevine. By the time they reached their driveway, 3 neighboring families were waiting with an assortment of offerings: a large dog bed from the Petersons, whose son had recently left for college taking his St. Bernard with him, a bag of premium dog food from the Rodriguez family, and most surprisingly, a hand-carved wooden nameplate reading Ranger from old Mr. Finch, who had apparently been working on it since hearing the story from his grandson 30 minutes earlier. Towns decided he's a hero, Mrs. Peterson explained with a smile that didn't quite hide her curiosity as she peered into the SUV at the massive dog. Least we can do is make him comfortable. The unexpected support brought tears to Diane's eyes. After 6 months of feeling like outsiders in the tight-knit community, this simple gesture of acceptance meant more than their neighbors could know. Getting Ranger settled in the Wilson home presented its own challenges. The dog moved with deliberate caution, inspecting each room methodically before allowing Emma to guide him to the shaded back porch where they'd set up the donated dog bed. He accepted water gratefully but refused food, his attention focused on the surrounding property as if cataloging potential threats. "He's still on duty," Martha explained when Tom expressed concern about the dog's vigilance. "Franklin said Ranger never fully relaxes in a new environment until he's sure everyone is safe." She watched the dog with knowing eyes. "Give him time. He's been responsible for his own survival for 3 years. Trust doesn't come back overnight." As evening approached, Dr. Thornton returned with medication for Ranger's injury and equipment to properly clean and treat his wound. To everyone's surprise, Emma insisted on assisting, holding Ranger's head gently and murmuring reassurances as the veterinarian worked on his injured shoulder. "You're being so brave," she told him, fingers tentatively stroking his scarred face. "Braver than I was today." "That's not true," Dr. Thornton corrected gently as she applied antiseptic to the angry bruise revealed beneath Ranger's thick fur. "You ran nearly 5 miles while terrified. Emma, that takes incredible courage." "But I was running from someone who was trying to help me," Emma said, shame coloring her voice. "If I hadn't been so scared of him, maybe he wouldn't have gotten hurt." The veterinarian paused, meeting Emma's eyes directly. "Fear isn't something we choose, Emma. It's how we respond to fear that matters. And when it counted most, when your father had his rifle aimed at Ranger, you chose to speak up despite your fear." She nodded toward the dog. "That's why he trusts you now." As night fell over Pinewood Creek, the Wilson home settled into an uneasy new normal. Ranger remained on the back porch, accepting the cushioned bed but positioning himself where he could monitor both the yard and the hallway leading to Emma's room. Though the medication had eased his pain, he remained alert, ears swiveling at every unfamiliar sound. Emma, despite her exhaustion, found sleep elusive. The day's events replayed in her mind the terror of the chase, the bewildering revelation of Ranger's true intentions, the shame of realizing how wrong she had been. Around midnight, she slipped from her bed and padded quietly to the back porch. Ranger's eyes gleamed in the darkness, tracking her movement. He made no sound as she approached, but his tail thumped once against the wooden porch floor in acknowledgement. "You can sleep, you know," she whispered, settling cross-legged beside his bed. "We're safe here." The dog's expression seemed almost skeptical, causing Emma to smile despite herself. "Okay, maybe you're right to be cautious. I used to think this town was safe too. Until today." She drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Thank you for saving me. I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were doing." Ranger studied her for a long moment before doing something unexpected. He shifted position with a soft grunt of pain, creating a space on the large dog bed, then looked at Emma expectantly. "You want me to sit with you?" she asked, surprised. The dog's unwavering gaze was answer enough. Cautiously, Emma moved to the offered space, her back resting against the porch railing. After a moment's hesitation, Ranger lowered his massive head to her lap with a deep sigh that seemed to release months of tension. "I guess we both need some rest," Emma whispered, tentatively placing her hand on his broad head. When he didn't object, she began gently stroking his fur, marveling at how completely her fear had transformed into something else, something that felt remarkably like the beginning of trust. That was how Tom found them an hour later when he came to check on his daughter's empty bedroom. Emma had fallen asleep, sitting up, her hand resting protectively on Ranger's head, while the dog remained awake, amber eyes tracking Tom's movement, but making no aggressive move. "I owe you an apology," Tom said softly to the dog, kneeling at a respectful distance. "If you understand anything I'm saying, know that I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express." Ranger's ears flickered forward, his intelligent gaze assessing Tom with an intensity that made the man feel strangely transparent, as if the animal could see straight through to his deepest fears, the failure to protect his family financially, the struggle to find his place in this new community, and most of all, the terror of losing his daughter. "I would have shot you," Tom admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I was so afraid for Emma that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." He swallowed hard. "Thank you for being smarter than I was today." To his astonishment, Ranger slowly extended his uninjured paw toward Tom, placing it deliberately on the man's knee. The gesture, so human in its intentionality, brought unexpected tears to Tom's eyes. "I guess we have a deal." "Then," he whispered, gently accepting the offered paw, "you're welcome here for as long as you need." As dawn broke over Pinewood Creek, Sheriff Callahan's patrol car pulled into the Wilson driveway. The lawman looked grim as he approached the front door, hat in hand. "Tom," he nodded when the door opened. "Got some news you and Emma need to hear. Is she up?" Tom ushered the sheriff inside, calling softly for Diane and Emma. When they gathered in the living room, Ranger limped in from the porch, positioning himself protectively beside Emma's chair. Sheriff Callahan raised an eyebrow at the dog's presence but continued without comment. "We've been questioning the Conway boys separately all night. he began, accepting the coffee Diane offered with a grateful nod. What they've revealed is disturbing. Turns out they've been running more than dogfights on their property. They've been involved in a regional drug distribution network, using the fighting dogs as security. Emma's hand instinctively sought Ranger's fur, fingers curling into his thick coat. The reason I'm here, the sheriff continued, his gaze shifting to Emma, is that Tyler Conway made some threats during questioning. Specific threats against you, Emma, for witnessing their operation, and for what happened to their dogs. The room grew very still. The only sound Ranger's low, rumbling growl as he processed the sheriff's tone and Emma's sudden tension. Are we in danger? Tom asked, instinctively moving closer to his family. Sheriff Callahan sighed heavily. Tyler's in custody and will remain there. But his connections aren't. We've contacted the state police for additional support. But until this network is fully dismantled, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The threat was clear. What should we do? Diane asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Before the sheriff could respond, Ranger rose to his feet, favoring his injured shoulder, but standing tall nonetheless. He moved deliberately to the front window, looking out toward the driveway with focused intensity, then returned to Emma's side, his message unmistakable. Well, Sheriff Callahan said with the ghost of a smile, seems like you've already got your first line of defense in place. He nodded toward Ranger with newfound respect. A trained protection animal with search and rescue experience might be exactly what you need right now. Emma looked from the sheriff to Ranger, then to her parents. Sudden understanding dawning on her face. This isn't over. Is it? She asked quietly. No, sweetheart, Tom answered, meeting his daughter's gaze directly. I'm afraid it's just beginning. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as Emma sat at the kitchen table, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate without appetite. 3 days had passed since Sheriff Callahan's ominous warning, and the Wilson household had settled into an uneasy vigilance. Tom had taken leave from his construction job to remain home, his rifle never far from reach. Diane had rearranged her remote work schedule to avoid leaving Emma alone, and Ranger, despite his injured shoulder, had established an unwavering patrol pattern around the property, refusing to rest for more than brief intervals. He's going to make himself worse if he doesn't slow down, Diane murmured, watching through the window as the massive dog completed another perimeter check, his movement slightly stiff, but determined. Martha says it's how he was trained, Tom replied, refilling his coffee mug for the 3rd time that morning. Search and rescue dogs learn to work through pain when lives are at stake. The admiration in his voice couldn't disguise the guilt that still lingered when he looked at Ranger's bandaged shoulder. Emma set down her fork with a sigh that seemed too heavy for her 12 years. This is all my fault. If I hadn't gone down old Miller's trail— Stop right there, Tom interrupted firmly. None of this is your fault. Emma, the Conway boys were breaking the law long before you stumbled across them. If anything, you've helped bring down a dangerous operation. Your father's right, Diane added, smoothing Emma's tangled hair. Sheriff Callahan said the state police had been trying to infiltrate that drug network for months. Your encounter gave them the break they needed. The words were meant to comfort, but they rang hollow against the reality of their situation. The Wilsons had gone from outsiders in a small town to targets of a criminal organization in the space of 3 days. The initial community support neighbors bringing food and offering encouragement had begun to wane as the potential danger became clear. Several families had subtly distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the Wilsons' precarious situation. Martha Jenkins remained a steadfast exception, visiting daily to check on Ranger and share her knowledge of his training and behaviors. This morning she had arrived earlier than usual, her weathered face creased with concern as she examined Ranger's injury. "He's pushing himself too hard," she confirmed, applying fresh ointment to the wound while Emma held the dog steady. "The shoulder's not healing properly because he won't give it rest." "Can't you tell him to take it easy?" Emma asked, a note of desperation in her voice. "He listens to you," Martha smiled sadly. "He listens. Yes. But he's following his deepest training now, protect at all costs. Franklin said Ranger had the strongest protective instinct he'd ever seen in a working dog." She patted the animal's head fondly. "It's what made him exceptional in rescue operations and what's driving him now." The elderly woman straightened with difficulty, her arthritic joints protesting. "I'm afraid we're seeing the cost of his years in the wild, too. He's forgotten how to be part of a team, how to share the burden of protection." She fixed Emma with a penetrating gaze. "He needs to learn to trust again, not just you, but your parents, the authorities, the community. Right now, he believes he's the only thing standing between you and danger." The truth of Martha's assessment became painfully evident that afternoon when Dr. Thornton arrived for Ranger's scheduled examination. The veterinarian frowned deeply as she reviewed the dog's condition, noting his elevated heart rate, the inflammation around his shoulder wound, and signs of exhaustion that couldn't be masked by Ranger's stoic demeanor. "This can't continue," she said bluntly, packing away her stethoscope. "He's running himself into the ground. If we don't intervene, he'll collapse within days." "What can we do?" Tom asked, watching as Ranger immediately resumed his guard position by the front window after the examination, amber eyes scanning the street with unwavering vigilance. "Sedation might be our only option," Dr. Thornton replied reluctantly. "Force him to rest before he does permanent damage to that shoulder. In a normal case, I'd recommend hospitalization. But—" She glanced at Emma, who had gone pale at the suggestion. "You can't take him away," the girl protested, moving protectively to Ranger's side. "He'd think we abandoned him, and he wouldn't allow it anyway," Martha added from her position in the corner armchair. "Not while he perceives a threat to Emma." Dr. Thornton sighed, rubbing her forehead tiredly. "Then we're at an impasse. Ranger won't rest while he feels Emma is in danger. But without rest, he'll be physically unable to protect anyone within a matter of days." The conversation circled without resolution, each suggestion meeting a logical obstacle, until Sheriff Callahan's patrol car pulled into the driveway, bringing the discussion to an abrupt halt. Ranger moved to the door with surprising speed, positioning himself between the entrance and Emma, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "It's just the sheriff," Tom reassured, though he too looked concerned at the unexpected visit. When Callahan entered, his expression confirmed their worst fears. "We've got a problem," he announced without preamble. "Tyler Conway made bail this morning. His uncle from Tucson posted bond a man with known connections to the same distribution network we're investigating." "How is that possible?" Diane demanded, instinctively moving closer to Emma. You said he'd remain in custody. Judge Harmon set bail despite my objections, the sheriff replied grimly. The Conway family has unexpected resources and, apparently, friends in the county legal system. He removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. I've requested additional patrols for your area, but my department is stretched thin as it is. Ranger's growl deepened, his understanding of the conversation evident in his intensified vigilance. The dog moved to the window again, scanning the street with renewed purpose, his injured leg trembling slightly with the strain. What about a safe house? Dr. Thornton suggested. Somewhere outside county lines until this blows over. Sheriff Callahan shook his head. The state police are closing in on the larger operation, but it could take weeks, and Tyler Conway made it very clear during booking that he holds Emma personally responsible for destroying his business. A safe house might just postpone the inevitable. The weight of the situation settled over the room like a physical presence. Emma felt tears welling in her eyes, not for herself, but for Ranger, who had saved her once and was now killing himself trying to save her again. This is killing him, she whispered, watching as Ranger's powerful body trembled with exhaustion, yet refused to yield its post. He won't stop until... Her words were cut short by the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Ranger was in motion instantly, a blur of fur and focused intent as he charged down the hallway toward the kitchen. Sheriff Callahan drew his weapon, shouting for everyone to get down as Tom reached for his rifle. The next moments unfolded in chaotic fragments: Ranger's deep, threatening bark, a man's startled curse, the sheriff's pounding footsteps following the dog's path, and then a sound that stopped Emma's heart, a single gunshot, followed by an agonized yelp that cut off abruptly. "Ranger!" Emma screamed, breaking free of her mother's restraining grip and running toward the kitchen. "Ranger!" She rounded the corner to a scene of nightmare-shattered glass from the broken window, Sheriff Callahan handcuffing a man in a dark hoodie who lay face down on the linoleum. And Ranger, her Ranger, collapsed in a growing pool of blood, his amber eyes fixed on the intruder, but rapidly losing focus. "No, no, no," Emma sobbed, dropping to her knees beside the massive dog, hands hovering helplessly over his blood-soaked fur. "Please, no." "Doctor." Thornton pushed past her, medical training overcoming shock as she quickly assessed Ranger's wound. "Gunshot to the chest," she reported tersely. "We need to get him to my clinic immediately. Tom, grab that tablecloth. We need a pressure bandage and a way to transport him." Ranger's breathing had become shallow and labored, each exhale bringing a froth of blood to his muzzle. Yet even now, mortally wounded, his eyes sought Emma, a low whine escaping him as he tried to lift his head toward her. "Stay still, boy," Emma pleaded, finally daring to touch his bloodied fur. "Please hold on. Please don't leave me." But the light in Ranger's intelligent eyes was fading rapidly, his massive body growing still despite their desperate efforts to stem the bleeding, as they struggled to lift him onto the makeshift stretcher Tom had fashioned from the tablecloth. Ranger's head lolled lifelessly to the side. "We're losing him," Dr. Thornton said, her professional detachment cracking. "Emma, talk to him, keep him fighting." Through her tears, Emma leaned close to Ranger's scarred face. "You can't go," she whispered fiercely. "You found me." "You saved me. Now it's my turn to save you." But the only response was the increasingly irregular rise and fall of the dog's chest as life ebbed from the body that had endured so much, survived so long, only to fall protecting the one person who had finally seen him for what he truly was, not a monster, but a hero. The waiting room of Pinewood Creek Veterinary Clinic had never felt so small. Emma sat rigid between her parents, dried blood still crusting her hands and staining her t-shirt. She hadn't spoken since they'd loaded Ranger's limp form into the back of Tom's pickup truck, her father breaking every speed limit in the county while Dr. Thornton performed desperate measures to keep the dog's heart beating. Sheriff Callahan had remained behind to process the intruder, a known associate of the Conway family, who had been caught with both a handgun and a syringe filled with what the sheriff suspected was a lethal dose of sedative. He wasn't just trying to scare us, Tom had realized with horror as they'd raced toward town. He was coming for Emma. Now, 2 hours into Ranger's emergency surgery, the Wilson family waited in a silence punctuated only by the ticking of an ancient wall clock and the occasional ring of the clinic's phone. Martha Jenkins sat across from them, her weathered hands clasped in what might have been prayer, her expression unreadable behind deeply etched wrinkles. "He's survived so much," the elderly woman said suddenly, her voice startling in the quiet room. 3 years in the wild, fights with coyotes and feral dogs, winters without shelter, summer heat without reliable water. She fixed Emma with a gaze both fierce and gentle. "Ranger doesn't give up easily." Emma nodded mutely, unable to form words around the knot of guilt and grief that had taken residence in her throat. The image of Ranger's blood pooling on their kitchen floor seemed burned into her retinas, visible every time she closed her eyes. The clinic door swung open, admitting Sheriff Callahan, his uniform still showing dark splatters from the scene at the Wilson home. He removed his hat respectfully, nodding to each person in turn before settling his gaze on Tom and Diane. "Just came from questioning our intruder," he said without preamble. "Dwayne Miller, low-level enforcer for the Conway family's operation. He's talking, hoping for a deal." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Turns out Tyler wasn't just angry about his dogs or his arrest. Your daughter witnessed their entire distribution network in action that day on Old Miller's Trail. Those hunting dogs they claimed to be exercising, they were meeting with couriers, exchanging product." Tom's hand tightened on Emma's shoulder. "So, this isn't going away?" "No," Sheriff Callahan admitted. "But Miller's testimony gives the state police what they need for a coordinated sweep. They're moving on 5 locations across 2 counties as we speak, including the Conway property." He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "Tyler Conway was taken into custody again 10 minutes ago. No bail this time." A tentative relief began to loosen the knot in Emma's chest, but before she could process this news, the door to the surgical area opened. Dr. Thornton emerged, surgical mask pulled down around her neck, her scrubs covered by a blood-stained gown. The exhaustion in her eyes told its own story before she spoke a word. "The bullet penetrated his chest cavity," she began, her clinical tone barely masking deeper emotion. "It missed his heart by centimeters, but damaged his left lung and caused significant internal bleeding. We've removed the bullet, repaired what we could, and given him a transfusion. But—" She took a deep breath. "The next 24 hours are critical. He's lost a lot of blood, and there's significant risk of infection. And that's not accounting for the prior shoulder injury and general exhaustion. But he's alive." Emma found her voice at last. the words barely audible. Dr. Thornton nodded. He's alive. Whether he stays that way depends on his will to fight and, frankly, whether his body has anything left to fight with. Can I see him? Emma asked, rising from her chair. The veterinarian hesitated. He's heavily sedated and connected to monitoring equipment. It won't be easy to see him like that. Please, Emma whispered. He needs to know he's not alone. After a moment's consideration, Dr. Thornton nodded. Just you, Emma, and only for a few minutes. He needs absolute calm right now. Emma followed the veterinarian through the door into a small recovery area that smelled of antiseptic and blood. Ranger lay on a padded table, his massive form somehow diminished by the tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular movements, each breath appearing to require tremendous effort. "Oh, Ranger," Emma breathed, approaching slowly. The dog's eyes remained closed, his normally alert ears slack against his head. A large shaved patch on his chest revealed an angry surgical wound held closed with precise stitches, while his previously injured shoulder now sported a more substantial bandage. "You can touch him," Dr. Thornton encouraged gently. "Just avoid the surgical sites." With trembling fingers, Emma reached out to stroke Ranger's head, the coarse fur familiar beneath her touch, despite the circumstances. "I'm here," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "You saved me again. Now you have to save yourself. Okay. We're going to take care of you this time." For a moment, there was no response. Then, so subtly she might have imagined it, Ranger's ear twitched toward the sound of her voice. One of the monitoring machines beeped, drawing Dr. Thornton's attention. His heart rate just stabilized a bit, the veterinarian observed with quiet surprise. "Keep talking to him." Emma continued her gentle petting, finding words she hadn't known she had. "Remember when I was so afraid of you that seemed silly now? You were trying to protect me the whole time, and I was too scared to see it." A tear slipped down her cheek, landing on Ranger's fur. "I'm not scared anymore. And you don't have to be the only protector now. Sheriff Callahan caught the bad guys. My dad is standing guard. You can rest and get better." The machines continued their steady beeping, but Ranger remained unresponsive beyond the slight movement of his ear. After a few minutes, Dr. Thornton gently placed her hand on Emma's shoulder. "That's enough for now. We need to let him rest." Emma nodded reluctantly, giving Ranger's head a final gentle stroke. "I'll be back," she promised. "Don't you dare give up." In the waiting room, Sheriff Callahan was providing additional details to Tom and Diane. The coordinated police operation had already yielded significant arrests, including several figures higher in the distribution network than the Conway family. "The immediate threat to Emma has been neutralized," he concluded. "But your family has been through a trauma that won't disappear overnight. I'd recommend counseling, security upgrades for your home, and..." He glanced toward the surgical area, continuing to care for the hero who made all this possible. "If he survives," Martha Jenkins said quietly, the words landing like stones in still water. "When," Emma corrected firmly, returning to the waiting room. "When he survives." The next 12 hours unfolded in an agonizing rhythm of hope and despair. Ranger's condition fluctuated, stabilizing enough to give them hope, then deteriorating without warning. By midnight, Dr. Thornton had called in a colleague from the county animal hospital for consultation, the two veterinarians speaking in hushed, technical terms that did nothing to ease the Wilson family's worry. "His body is trying to shut down," Dr. Thornton finally explained after one particularly alarming episode. The combined trauma of the gunshot, previous injury, and years of hard living in the wild, it's simply too much. "There must be something more we can do," Tom insisted. The man who had once aimed a rifle at Ranger, now his most passionate advocate. Dr. Thornton shook her head wearily. "We're giving him antibiotics, pain management, fluids, blood products, medically. We're doing everything possible." "Then we need to try something else," Martha suggested, her voice carrying the authority of her years. "Something beyond medicine." All eyes turned to the elderly woman as she elaborated. "Franklin always said Ranger had something special, a connection to people that went deeper than training. It's why he excelled at search and rescue, why he could find victims when other dogs couldn't. He senses human emotion, human need." "What are you suggesting?" Diane asked. "I'm suggesting," Martha replied deliberately, "that Ranger needs more than medicine to fight this battle. He needs a reason." Without waiting for further explanation, Emma moved toward the recovery room door. "I need to be with him," she stated with quiet determination. "All night, if that's what it takes." Dr. Thornton began to object on medical grounds, but Martha raised a hand to silence her. "The girl is right. Ranger held on this long for her. Let her give him something to hold on for a little longer." Against her better professional judgment, Dr. Thornton arranged a chair beside Ranger's recovery table. Emma settled in for the night vigil, one hand resting gently on the dog's uninjured side, feeling the shallow rise and fall of his breathing beneath her fingers. "I've been thinking about what to do when you get better," she began softly, as if they were simply having a conversation. "Dad says we can convert the back porch into a proper space for you, with big windows so you can keep watch if you want to. Mom's already ordered this fancy orthopedic dog bed online. She says it's important for your shoulder to heal properly." Through the night, Emma continued her one-sided conversation, sharing plans, memories, hopes, and eventually, as exhaustion lowered her defenses, her deepest fears. "I was so afraid of dogs after being bitten," she confessed in the pre-dawn darkness, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had nightmares about teeth and growling. When I saw you running behind me, it was like my worst fear coming to life." Her fingers gently traced the scar on Ranger's face. "But you were never the monster in this story, were you? You were the hero all along. My hero." As sunrise painted the clinic windows with golden light, Dr. Thornton entered to check Ranger's vital signs. The veterinarian moved quietly, respecting Emma's vigil, but her surprised intake of breath drew the girl's attention. "What is it? What's wrong?" Emma asked, fully alert despite her exhaustion. Dr. Thornton adjusted one of the monitoring devices, checking and rechecking the readings with growing amazement. "His vitals are stabilizing, pulse stronger, respiration more regular. The infection markers in his blood work are down significantly from last night." She looked at Emma with newfound respect. "Whatever you've been doing, it's working." As if to confirm this assessment, Ranger's ear twitched, followed by the barest flicker of movement beneath his closed eyelids. Emma leaned closer, hardly daring to hope. "Ranger, can you hear me? Boy." For the first time since the shooting, Ranger's amber eyes opened unfocused at first, then gradually finding and fixing on Emma's face. His tail moved weakly against the table, a ghost of a wag that nonetheless spoke volumes. "Dr. Thornton," Emma called, her voice breaking with emotion. "He's awake. He sees me." The veterinarian quickly checked Ranger's responses, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine amazement. "I've practiced for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "Medically, he shouldn't be showing this kind of improvement so quickly." Martha Jenkins appeared in the doorway, summoned by Emma's exclamation. The elderly woman took in the scene with knowing eyes and a small, satisfied smile. "Some connections go beyond explanation," she said simply. "Franklin would say it's because Ranger found his person." As word spread of Ranger's remarkable turnaround, the small veterinary clinic became the unlikely center of a community revelation. The fearsome ghost dog of Pinewood Creek had transformed in the town's collective consciousness from monster to guardian, from threat to protector. And the Wilsons, so recently outsiders, found themselves at the heart of a community united in support of an unexpected hero. 6 weeks after the shooting, Pinewood Creek basked in the golden light of late summer. The Wilsons' front yard, once bare and neglected, now boasted fresh landscaping, a community project that had materialized one Saturday morning when a dozen neighbors arrived with tools, plants, and determined expressions. "Security upgrades," Bill Hawkins had called it with a wink, though the flowering bushes and ornamental trees seemed more aesthetic than protective. The true security improvements were less visible but more substantial motion-activated lights, reinforced doors and windows, and a state-of-the-art alarm system donated by a security company in Phoenix whose owner had grown up in Pinewood Creek and followed the story with interest. On this particular morning, Emma sat on the front porch steps, sketchbook open on her lap, colored pencils scattered beside her. Her drawings had evolved in recent weeks, shifting from the distant landscapes of her earlier work to more intimate portraits, most frequently of a certain German shepherd-husky mix, whose likeness she had captured in various poses across dozens of pages. The subject of these sketches lay nearby in a patch of dappled shade, his recovery evident in the improved muscle tone and alertness that had gradually returned to his powerful frame. Ranger's chest still bore the angry red scar from the bullet wound, and his gait retained a slight unevenness from the shoulder injury. But Dr. Thornton had pronounced his recovery nothing short of miraculous at his last checkup. "What do you think?" Emma asked, turning her latest drawing toward Ranger. The portrait captured him in profile, his scarred face noble against a background of desert landscape, amber eyes watchful but peaceful. Ranger lifted his head to examine the artwork, an almost human thoughtfulness in his gaze that never failed to amaze Emma. After a moment's consideration, his tail swept once across the ground in apparent approval. "I thought you'd like that one." Emma smiled, adding her signature to the bottom corner. Jenkins says I should enter it in the county fair art contest next month. At the mention of Martha Jenkins, Ranger's ears perked up, his attention shifting to the road where the elderly woman's pickup truck had just appeared. Though Martha had formally transferred Ranger's ownership to the Wilson family, complete with proper documentation and a tearful ceremony, she remained a daily visitor and an invaluable guide to Ranger's training and care. "Right on time," Emma noted, closing her sketchbook as Martha parked and made her way carefully up the newly installed wheelchair-accessible ramp that Tom had built for her increasingly troublesome knees. "Good morning, young artist," Martha called, her weathered face creasing in a smile that reached her faded blue eyes. "And how's our hero today?" Ranger rose to greet her, his movement deliberate but stronger than the previous week. He pressed his nose gently against Martha's hand in greeting, accepting her knowledgeable examination of his healing wounds with dignified patience. "Better every day," Martha observed with satisfaction. "Franklin would be so proud to see how well you've recovered." The mention of his former owner caused Ranger's ears to flick backward momentarily, a gesture Emma had come to recognize as acknowledgement of the past. Through Martha's stories and photographs, Ranger's history had been gradually pieced together: his early training with Franklin Miller, their years of service in search and rescue operations across 3 states, the medals and commendations they had earned together. Understanding this history had helped Emma appreciate the depth of what Ranger had lost when Franklin died, and the remarkable resilience that had allowed him to survive the wilderness years that followed. "Mom made fresh lemonade," Emma offered, holding the screen door open. "Dad's inside going over the security system with Sheriff Callahan again." Martha nodded knowingly as she followed Emma into the house, Ranger padding silently behind them. "Tom's not taking any chances, is he? Can't say I blame him after everything that's happened." Inside, the Wilson home reflected the dramatic changes of the past 6 weeks. What had once been a sparsely furnished rental now felt lived in and personal. Photos hung on walls that had previously been bare. Throw pillows brightened the second-hand furniture, and a state map adorned with colored pins marked places the family planned to visit together. Most significant was the renovation of the back porch, now enclosed with windows and French doors to create a sunroom that served as Ranger's domain. A custom-built bed occupied one corner, though Emma's parents had long since stopped pretending that Ranger actually slept there instead of on the floor beside Emma's bed. Built-in shelves held an assortment of specialized equipment, grooming tools, training aids, and the service vest Martha had salvaged from Franklin's belongings, carefully cleaned and repaired for future use. Tom Wilson and Sheriff Callahan looked up from the security systems control panel as Emma, Martha, and Ranger entered the living room. The relationship between the 2 men had evolved from the professional courtesy of law enforcement and citizen to something approaching genuine friendship, forged in the crucible of shared crisis. "Mike was just updating me on the Conway case," Tom explained, accepting the glass of lemonade Diane brought from the kitchen. "Looks like we'll all be testifying at the federal trial next month." Sheriff Callahan nodded confirmation. "The prosecutor says Emma's testimony, combined with the evidence we gathered from the Conway property, gives them a rock-solid case. Tyler's looking at a minimum of 15 years. The mention of testifying caused Emma's shoulders to tense slightly, a reaction not lost on Ranger, who immediately moved closer to her side, pressing reassuringly against her leg. The physical connection had become their silent language of support, Ranger sensing her anxiety before she could even articulate it, Emma drawing strength from his unwavering presence. "You don't have to decide about testifying right now," Diane said gently, noting her daughter's discomfort. The prosecutor said they can arrange for you to testify via closed circuit if being in the courtroom feels too overwhelming. Emma shook her head, one hand finding comfort in the familiar texture of Ranger's fur. I want to be there in person. I need Tyler to see that he didn't win, that he didn't break us. Her voice carried a new confidence that had emerged gradually during Ranger's recovery, as if his healing had somehow facilitated her own. Sheriff Callahan smiled approvingly. That's brave, Emma. And you know we'll all be there with you. Will Ranger be allowed in the courtroom? Emma asked, the question directed at both the sheriff and her parents. An interesting exchange of glances passed between the adults before Martha Jenkins cleared her throat. That's actually something I wanted to discuss with all of you today, she said, settling into an armchair with a slight wince at her arthritic joints. I've been in touch with my old contacts at the State Search and Rescue Division. They're very interested in Ranger's story, particularly his protective instincts and his remarkable recovery. Tom leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Interested how? Exactly. They've proposed a specialized recertification program, Martha explained. Modified to account for Ranger's injuries, of course, but focused on his demonstrated abilities in protection and threat assessment. If he passes, and I have no doubt he will, he would be officially registered as a service animal with specific training in PTSD support and protective companionship. A service dog, Emma repeated, looking down at Ranger with wonder. Like, officially? Martha nodded. With proper certification. He could accompany you anywhere: school, public buildings, courtrooms. She smiled at Sheriff Callahan. Even places where pets aren't typically allowed. That would be... Emma searched for words adequate to express the emotion welling in her chest. That would be amazing. He could really come with me everywhere. There would be intensive training involved. Martha cautioned. For both of you. Ranger already has the foundational skills from his previous certification, but you would need to learn proper handling techniques, command structures, public etiquette. She fixed Emma with a serious gaze. It's a significant commitment. I'll do it, Emma said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. Diane and Tom exchanged a glance laden with unspoken communication, the kind of parental telepathy that had become more pronounced since the crisis had brought them closer as a family. We support this, Tom said finally. On one condition. He knelt to Ranger's level, meeting the dog's intelligent gaze directly. You have to promise to start taking better care of yourself, too. No more running yourself into the ground. This is a partnership now. Understood. As if comprehending every word, Ranger extended his paw formally, placing it in Tom's outstretched hand with deliberate intent, the same gesture that had sealed their initial trust weeks earlier. The simple action brought unexpected emotion to Tom's eyes, a reminder of how far they had all come from that first terrifying chase. Well, I reckon that's settled then, Sheriff Callahan said, clearing his throat to disguise his own reaction to the moment. First service dog in Pinewood Creek history. Quite a turn of events for our local ghost dog. The conversation shifted to practical matters, training schedules, equipment needs, the logistics of incorporating Ranger's new role into the family's daily life. Through it all, Emma remained quietly attentive, one hand resting on Ranger's head, occasionally scratching behind his ears in the spot she had discovered he particularly enjoyed. Later, As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the yard, Emma and Ranger walked together down Cottonwood Road, the same route where their harrowing chase had unfolded just 6 weeks earlier. The memory still carried emotional weight, but its sharp edges had softened, transformed by understanding and the healing passage of time. They paused at the spot where Emma had first realized Ranger might be protecting her, rather than pursuing her. The dusty shoulder of the road looked ordinary now, bearing no visible evidence of that pivotal moment. Yet Emma felt its significance like an invisible marker on her personal map. "I was so wrong about you," she said softly, kneeling beside Ranger. "I saw what I expected to see, a monster. Something to fear instead of who you really were." Ranger's amber eyes held her gaze with an intelligence that sometimes still took her breath away. There was forgiveness in that look, and something deeper, a connection that defied simple explanation. "Martha says you found your person," Emma continued, her fingers gently tracing the scar on his face that had once terrified her but now seemed simply a part of who he was. "But I think maybe we found each other." As the summer sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the landscape, Emma Wilson and the dog who had saved her walked homeward together, no longer predator and prey, monster and victim, but partners in a journey neither could have imagined on that fateful day when a terrified girl ran from the very hero she most needed, in Pinewood Creek, Arizona. The story was already becoming something of a local legend, how fear could blind, how appearances could deceive, and how sometimes the thing that frightens us most might be exactly what we need to face the dangers we never saw coming. In the twilight of our lives, we often find wisdom in unexpected places. Emma and Ranger's story reminds us that what appears threatening might be our greatest protection. What seems broken might be remarkably whole. How many times have we, like Emma, misjudged someone based on scars they carry? How often have we, like Ranger, persisted in our purpose despite wounds both visible and hidden? This tale speaks to our generation's deepest truths, that second chances aren't just for the young, that courage doesn't diminish with age, and that protection often comes from those we least expect. Martha Jenkins, with her arthritic hands and weathered wisdom, shows us that our value doesn't fade with our youth. We recognize ourselves in Tom's initial fear and subsequent humility, in the community that eventually rallied around strangers, in the redemption that follows misjudgment. As we navigate our own changing roles, becoming grandparents, retiring, reimagining our purpose, Ranger's transformation from feared outsider to essential guardian mirrors our own journey to find new meaning. Remember, sometimes the path forward requires us to look again at what we thought we knew, to recognize the heroes disguised by our own preconceptions, and to accept help from those we once feared.